In the heart of Moscow, just off the Altufyevskoye highway, inside a seemingly ordinary apartment, a horror story was unfolding. One that would eventually shake an entire nation and force Russia to confront its silence around domestic abuse. It began with a call to emergency services. A father was dead, his body sprawled near the staircase of his own home. And the ones who had made the call, covered in their own blood, were not strangers. They were his daughters. 3 teenage sisters. 10-year-old Kristina, 10-year-old Angelina, 10-year-old Maria. Within hours, they confessed. Yes, they had killed their father. But what they revealed next stopped everyone in their tracks. For years, they said, they had lived under constant fear, humiliated, starved of freedom, beaten, threatened at gunpoint, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, by the man who was supposed to protect them. This wasn't just a murder case. This was a case about survival, about a system that looked the other way, about a family that suffered in silence until silence nearly killed them. The Russian authorities called it premeditated murder. The sisters' lawyers called it necessary self-defense. The public, torn between law and conscience, flooded the streets with placards and petitions. What happens when victims have nowhere left to run? When the walls of your own home become a prison? When no neighbor intervenes, no police officer believes you, and the one person holding you hostage is your father? This story isn't fiction. It's not a twisted movie plot. It's the real-life account young people forced to do the unthinkable. And the question at the center of it all remains: did they murder their father in cold blood? Or did they finally break free? In this documentary, we walk through the lives of the Khachaturian sisters, the years of torment, the night it all came crashing down, and the global movement that rose in their defense. Welcome to the Crime Series. I'm glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. Mikhail Khachaturian was born in 1961 and lived much of his adult life in Moscow. Though he projected an image of religious devotion, frequently traveling to Israel for prayer and wearing symbols of faith, his public persona sharply contrasted with a darker, concealed reality. He never maintained steady employment, and his means of income remained largely unexplained. Locals often whispered that he was involved in the drug trade or petty crime. Neighbors noted suspicious visitors and erratic behavior. Despite repeated signs of illegal activity, law enforcement appeared reluctant to intervene. Mikhail's close ties to local police authorities granted him a troubling form of immunity. This informal protection allowed him to act with impunity, not just in the streets, but inside his own home. Mikhail presented himself as the moral and spiritual authority within his household. He used religious justification to impose strict obedience and submission. He discouraged television, filtered the girls' reading materials, and prohibited friendships outside the home. Prayer and fasting were mandatory, but his interpretation of faith was laced with control and manipulation. To some outsiders, Mikhail was a complex contradiction, outwardly pious, yet inwardly abusive and volatile. He attended religious services and quoted scripture, but those closest to him knew a very different man. He was domineering, impulsive, and prone to violent outbursts. Now let's go back in time. Mikhail Khachaturian met 17-year-old Aurelia Dunduk at a bus stop in Moscow. He was 34 years old at the time. Aurelia had recently migrated from another country with her mother, struggling to find stable housing or income. Mikhail offered them a ride, presented himself as kind and reliable, and soon began helping them with basic needs. Within weeks, he invited Aurelia to move in with him. Desperate for security, she agreed. What started as a relationship rooted in charm and promises quickly turned into a suffocating partnership marked by control and fear. Within months, Aurelia became pregnant with their first child, Sergei. Mikhail insisted they get married, even though Aurelia was already enduring verbal and physical abuse. According to her later accounts, the wedding was more of a trap than a celebration. "We got married with tears in my eyes," she once said. "He beat me, and after that, we went to get married." Soon after Sergei's birth, Mikhail imposed strict limitations on Aurelia. She was not allowed to work, continue her education, or leave the house without his permission. He dictated everything, from what she wore to who she could speak to. If she challenged his authority, the consequences were violent. He accused her constantly of infidelity and became obsessed with controlling her reproductive choices. When she tried to use birth control secretly, he accused her of trying to deceive him and claimed the children weren't biologically his. As the family grew, with the births of Christina, Angelina, and Maria, the abuse escalated. Mikhail's rage became more frequent and unpredictable. He lashed out over minor issues, uncooked food, household clutter, or even the way the children looked at him. He saw himself as the absolute authority and enforced his rules with fists, threats, and fear. The children were frequently caught in the crossfire. From a young age, they witnessed their mother being beaten and degraded. They too began to suffer the same treatment. Mikhail forbade the children from making friends or attending school regularly. As they grew older, their social world shrank to the four walls of their home. He often told them they belonged to him, that they were his property, and that no one could save them. Not their mother, not the police, not the neighbors. He kept weapons in the home and made sure everyone knew it. His paranoia drove him to install locks, keep the girls separated, and monitor their every move. Report says Aurelia tried multiple times to leave, especially after particularly brutal attacks. But Mikhail would threaten to kill her or harm the children if she ever attempted to escape. This made her stay back, but he still isolated her completely that she had no one to turn to for help. Friends were pushed away. Family members were silenced. Sergei, the eldest child and only son, endured years of psychological and physical abuse from Mikhail. From a young age, he was subjected to beatings under the guise of discipline. Mikhail believed Sergei was not his biological son and treated him as an outsider. This suspicion grew into hostility. When Sergei turned 16, Mikhail threw him out of the house. The boy had no place to go and ended up sleeping in stairwells and makeshift shelters, often relying on friends or passers-by. Aurelia tried to help her son in secret. She would meet him near metro stations, slipping him food, money, or warm clothes. Her support remained discreet until Mikhail found out. Upon discovering her contact with Sergei, he reacted violently. According to Aurelia's interviews, he threatened to kill her if she ever attempted to see her children again. In 2015, Mikhail's reign of control reached its peak. Aurelia was completely barred from the household. Mikhail manipulated the girls into believing that their mother had abandoned them. He monitored their phone use, blocked calls, and forbade them from speaking to anyone outside the home. Teachers and social workers were deceived with claims that the family was dealing with illness or private issues. Any signs of external interference were quickly shut down. With Sergei living on the streets and Aurelia cast out, the girls were left entirely alone with their abuser. Mikhail now had total authority. The house became a closed system where fear, silence, and submission ruled. Over time, the daughters lost all reference points for what normal life should look like. They became isolated not only physically, but emotionally, cut off from support, empathy, and hope. This period, marked by forced isolation, weaponized fear, and systemic neglect, set the stage for what would follow. Mikhail installed cameras in various rooms of the house to monitor their every move. He had a special bell he rang day or night to summon them instantly, whether to bring him food, open a window, or simply serve him as if they were housemaids. Any delay or refusal was met with harsh punishment. He beat them regularly, sometimes with his fists. On more than one occasion, he fired rubber pellets at them. Their injuries were visible, bruises on their faces, arms, and legs. But when questioned at school, the girls gave rehearsed answers, fearing further violence. Mikhail slowly isolated them from the outside world. He prevented them from attending school consistently, claiming illnesses or family emergencies. Teachers noticed the irregular attendance, especially for Angelina and Maria. The school principal confirmed that in 2017 and 2018, school authorities contacted child services and guardianship agencies multiple times to report their concerns. Despite these reports, no effective intervention followed. One meeting was held with Mikhail and a child inspector, but it resulted in no action. School staff were frustrated by the inaction but felt powerless. He used sleep deprivation as a tactic, waking them up for no reason in the middle of the night, and forcing them to serve him while he stayed in bed. His paranoia extended to locking the fridge and storing keys and valuables in his bedroom. Maria and Angelina, the youngest, were kept home most days to look after their father. Their education, social life, and mental development were severely disrupted. Their older sister, Christina, had to act as both a buffer and protector, often intervening when beatings escalated. She later told investigators that she believed Mikhail would eventually kill one or all of them if no one stopped him. In 2014, the Khachaturian family traveled to Israel. It was during this trip that the abuse escalated into something even more disturbing. Mikhail Khachaturian, already known for his violent control over his daughters, Angelina. He told her that she was not his biological daughter and insisted that she was destined to become his wife when she turned. This justification became a terrifying pattern, one he used to manipulate, isolate, and violate. When they returned to Moscow, Mikhail's abuse became routine. He coerced Angelina into sexual acts, and soon the same behavior extended to her sisters, Christina and Maria. He would order them to bathe with him and demanded daily massages, using these moments to assert dominance and commit further assaults. By late 2016, report says Angelina began harming herself. She was once found in the bathroom with superficial cuts on her arms. Maria, the youngest, tried running away twice but was caught and beaten. The sisters felt completely abandoned. No one believed them. No one intervened. Every door they might have turned to was closed. During this period, the girls were increasingly isolated from their peers. Angelina and Maria, though still of school age, were no longer allowed to attend regularly. Mikhail preferred to keep them at home, out of sight. His control was so complete that even their mother, Aurelia, was unaware of the full extent of the horror they were enduring. When later interviewed, she said, "They never told me everything. They didn't want to hurt me more." By 2018, the psychological damage was deeply rooted. The home had become a cage of abuse and fear. The sisters were not just victims. They were prisoners in their own home, living each day under the shadow of violence and the constant threat of worse. By the time they were in their mid-teens, the Khachaturian sisters were experiencing deep psychological trauma. Years of relentless physical, emotional, and sexual abuse had left visible and invisible scars. The home was not just oppressive, it was a site of psychological warfare. Mikhail Khachaturian isolated the girls from the outside world, fed them a steady diet of fear, and made it clear that they belonged to him. He reminded them constantly that they were his property, created to serve and obey. The effects were devastating. Maria, the youngest, was once left tied to a tree in a forest for hours after she resisted his demands. That incident became one of the clearest indicators of his cruelty and the girl's complete lack of safety. On another occasion, after suffering what she described as unbearable mental torment, one of the sisters attempted suicide. She was rushed to the hospital, but the real reason was concealed. Doctors were told it was a reaction to medication. No further inquiry was made. The system did not ask, and Mikhail ensured there were no answers. All three sisters began showing signs of depression and emotional breakdown. They lived in a constant state of fear, unable to sleep, unable to trust even one another fully, because Mikhail would often pit them against each other. In the evening of July 27, 2018, Mikhail Khachaturian had just returned to the family apartment after receiving medical treatment at the Solovyov Psychiatric and Neurological Center in Moscow. While specific details about the nature of his treatment are not publicly disclosed, It is documented that he had a history of psychological issues and had been prescribed sedatives. The atmosphere in the home was already tense. That day, Mikhail was enraged over what he claimed was excessive spending and the general condition of the apartment. His anger quickly turned violent. In a pattern that had become terrifyingly familiar, he isolated each of his daughters, Christina, Angelina, and Maria, locking himself in a room with them one by one. Inside, he released bursts of pepper spray directly into their faces. The gas was strong. Christina, who had a known history of asthma, collapsed, struggling to breathe. Angelina and Maria, witnessing their sister's reaction and fearing she might die, were gripped by panic. But more than panic, by a chilling certainty. If they didn't stop their father that night, he would eventually kill one or all of them. Later that evening, Mikhail dozed off in an armchair. The apartment was quiet, but the fear hadn't passed. The girls believed this might be their only chance. Angelina picked up a hammer and struck her father in the head. If you found this story compelling and appreciate the way we bring real-life cases to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth and share these important stories. Like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Maria, holding a hunting knife, began stabbing. According to forensic reports and confessions, she struck him multiple times. Mikhail woke in a frenzy, trying to fight back and escape the apartment. Christina, regaining some strength, entered the room and sprayed him with pepper spray, trying to protect her younger sisters. Mikhail stumbled out into the stairwell, but he didn't get far. As he tried to flee, Angelina caught up and plunged the knife into his chest. Once, directly into the heart. It was the blow that killed him. Moments after their father's death, the Khachaturian sisters were panicked but deliberate. They attempted to stage the scene to resemble an act of self-defense. Using the same knife that had just ended their father's life, they inflicted minor wounds on themselves. Then they picked up the phone and called the police, reporting the death. When law enforcement arrived at the scene on Altufievskoye Highway, they found Mikhail Khachaturian's lifeless body on the staircase landing of the family's apartment building. He had sustained numerous stab and cut wounds, most critically to his chest and neck. Inside the apartment, officers discovered a troubling cache of weapons: a hunting knife, a hammer, a crossbow, a traumatic pistol, 2 air guns, a rifle, and ammunition including 16 bullets and 16 darts. This arsenal hinted at the climate of fear in which the girls had been living. All 3 sisters, Christina, Angelina, and Maria, were taken into custody the following day, July 28, 2018. During their first police interviews, which were conducted without legal representation, they confessed to killing their father. They explained that they had acted after enduring years of severe physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Investigators recorded the motive as stemming from a hostile personal relationship due to long-term moral suffering. Initially, the charges filed against the girls were for murder without aggravating circumstances. However, within days, authorities escalated the case. After preliminary investigations, including forensic examinations, interviews, and evidence from surveillance cameras, the charges were upgraded to murder committed by a group of persons by prior agreement. This reclassification placed them under Article 115.2g of the Russian Criminal Code, punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Following the initial arrest of the Khachaturian sisters, investigators launched a comprehensive inquiry into both the murder and the family's history of abuse. Surveillance footage from inside the apartment building was collected and reviewed. It showed patterns of the father's movements and provided some confirmation of the timeline given by the sisters. The footage also revealed limited movement by the girls, reinforcing claims that they had been isolated and tightly controlled. Testimonies were gathered from neighbors, school officials, relatives, and acquaintances. Some of Mikhail's neighbors admitted they had heard repeated screaming over the years, but claimed it was a private matter. Teachers noted the girl's declining attendance and psychological distress, but attempts to intervene were either ignored or blocked by Mikhail, who controlled all contact. A school psychologist had tried to reach out, but without follow-up from social services, the girls remained trapped. In multiple interviews, classmates described the sisters as withdrawn, frequently anxious, and fearful of discussing their home life. Forensic evidence from the crime scene included the murder weapons, a hunting knife and a hammer, along with pepper spray canisters. Investigators found injuries on the sisters consistent with self-inflicted wounds, which the girls admitted to creating in a panic after the incident to frame it as self-defense. Combined with the physical evidence, confirmed a chaotic and desperate struggle rather than a coldly executed plan. A crucial part of the investigation focused on medical and psychological assessments. Each sister underwent a full psychiatric evaluation. Maria, the youngest at 18, was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. She was diagnosed with severe trauma-related disorders and transferred to a psychiatric ward at Buturka prison for treatment. Psychiatrists concluded that she lacked full awareness of her actions at the time of the incident due to prolonged psychological torture and the effects of complex PTSD. She also exhibited signs of dissociation and emotional numbness, often associated with chronic abuse victims. Christina and Angelina were also evaluated. Both were found to be legally sane but deeply traumatized. They were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and battered woman syndrome, a psychological condition that develops in people who have experienced chronic abuse. These findings became central to the defense's argument that the sisters had acted in a state of sustained fear and desperation, not with calculated intent. The assessments further revealed that both girls suffered from sleep disturbances, flashbacks, and extreme hypervigilance, consistent with long-term psychological trauma. Parallel to the girls' evaluations, investigators reviewed Mikhail Khachaturian's conduct. Reports confirmed that he had engaged in a consistent pattern of abusive, coercive behavior toward his daughters. Expert assessments labeled his behavior as manipulative and violent, driven by domination rather than any psychological impairment. Testimony from former acquaintances and relatives described him as deeply controlling, with a fixation on obedience and purity, often backed by threats of violence. The discovery of sexually explicit materials on his devices further corroborated the sisters' claims. The findings painted a grim picture, not just of a murder, but of years of unchecked violence and institutional failure. The case against the girls became as much about what they did as about what was done to them. Investigators faced increasing pressure to explain why no action had been taken earlier, despite multiple warning signs. The medical and psychological evaluations served not only as evidence of the girls' trauma, but also as a silent indictment of the systems that failed to intervene. As news of the case spread, Russia found itself at the center of a national reckoning. The story of the Khachaturian sisters, 3 girls accused of killing their abusive father, ignited a fierce debate that spilled into streets, social media, and courtrooms. For many, this wasn't just a murder case. It was a reflection of a broken system, one that failed to protect victims of domestic violence until it was too late. Human rights organizations quickly mobilized. Leading groups like Nasiliu.net and the Crisis Center for Women called for justice, not just for the sisters, but for all victims silenced behind closed doors. Within months, protests erupted across major Russian cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. Demonstrators held signs that read, "Self-defense is not a crime," and "We are the Khachaturian sisters." More than 130,000 people signed petitions demanding the state drop the charges. These campaigns weren't just online trends, they became symbolic acts of resistance against a judiciary seen as indifferent to abuse survivors. Prominent voices joined the call. Singer Serge Tankian, journalist Ksenia Sobchak, and human rights activist Alyona Popova used their platforms to spotlight the injustice. Their collective message was simple. These girls didn't need prison. They needed protection and rehabilitation. At the legal front, the sisters' lawyers presented a defense rooted in the concept of necessary self-defense. They argued that the girls had endured years of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Living in isolation, under constant threat, they believed there was no help coming. Mental health evaluations supported their claims. 2 of the sisters were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the youngest, Maria, was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. Despite overwhelming public support and the mounting evidence of abuse, investigators held their ground. They insisted the killing was not spontaneous, but carefully coordinated, a murder executed by prior agreement. The prosecution upgraded the charges to include aggravated murder, a move that could lead to a 20-year sentence. This growing divide between a justice system determined to pursue criminal charges and a public that saw the sisters as survivors only intensified scrutiny. Activists warned that a conviction would set a dangerous precedent, punishing victims who defend themselves. The legal defense continued to push for reclassification, arguing that justice must consider the years of violence that led up to the fatal night. In the eyes of many, this case was no longer about legality. It was about morality, societal failure, and the right to survive. After intense public scrutiny and legal pressure, the Russian Investigative Committee moved forward in 2019 with posthumous criminal charges against Mikhail Khachaturian. He was formally accused of multiple crimes: sexual assault, battery, torture, and coercion of his daughters. These charges came after mounting evidence, including testimonies, medical examinations, digital correspondence, and psychological evaluations, painted a clear and consistent portrait of prolonged abuse. The charges marked a pivotal moment in the case. For the first time, the Russian legal system began treating Mikhail not merely as a murder victim, but as a violent perpetrator. It was a legal and symbolic recognition of the horror the sisters endured. In the following months, forensic psychologists and criminal behavior analysts were brought in to evaluate Mikhail's conduct. Their conclusions were damning. Mikhail was described as highly manipulative, emotionally sadistic, and physically violent. Experts noted he used psychological control tactics such as isolation, intimidation, and weapon threats to dominate his daughters. He was diagnosed posthumously with a paraphilic disorder, specifically pedophilic disorder, and declared a sexual predator. The formal charges included 2 counts of sexual violence against minors, repeated physical abuse leading to grievous bodily harm, and the distribution of pornographic material via digital devices. Investigators found explicit content on devices seized from the home, supporting allegations that Mikhail forced the sisters into sexual acts and recorded some of them. Additional reports confirmed that he kept the girls out of school, confined them to the apartment, and used weapons to maintain control. In March 2023, the case against their father, Mikhail Khachaturian, was finally brought to trial, posthumously. He was charged with sexual violence against minors, the distribution of pornography, and the infliction of grievous bodily harm. By April 2025, a Moscow court formally convicted him on all counts. The judgment described a sustained pattern of violence, control, and psychological manipulation spanning several years. Expert testimony confirmed he suffered from a sexual disorder and had engaged in systematic abuse of his daughters. This historic conviction marked the first time a deceased abuser was found guilty in a posthumous trial of this nature in Russia. It also lent significant credibility to the sisters' claims, bolstering their defense case and fueling calls for their charges to be dismissed entirely. However, legal complications persist. The investigative committee has continued to push for trial, especially in the case of Christina and Angelina, who were declared legally competent. Maria, the youngest, remains under ongoing psychiatric evaluation and is not expected to stand trial until further assessments are completed. In late 2023, High-ranking officials within the Prosecutor General's office, including Anatoly Rozinkin and Igor Krasnov, refused to endorse the indictment, recommending a reassessment of the girl's motives and the circumstances under which the killing took place. They emphasized the psychological trauma inflicted by their father and the absence of timely institutional support. Although this recommendation suggested possible reclassification of the case from murder to necessary self-defense, no formal decision had been issued as of mid-2025. The sisters remain under legal scrutiny, but the tide appears to be turning. Public opinion, expert evaluations, and a rare posthumous conviction are all converging toward the same question. Should victims of extreme domestic abuse be prosecuted for defending themselves when the system failed to protect them? The Khachaturian sisters' case did more than dominate headlines. It ignited a nationwide debate on the state of domestic violence laws in Russia. At the heart of the controversy was a painful truth. Russia lacked comprehensive legislation to address and prevent domestic abuse. In 2017, the government had even decriminalized some forms of domestic violence, reducing penalties for first-time offenses that didn't cause serious harm. This legislative backdrop framed the Khachaturian case as not just a personal tragedy, but a systemic failure. Lawmakers, previously reluctant to challenge the status quo, began facing intense pressure. Human rights groups like Nasilyu.net and advocacy platforms launched petitions, organized protests, and demanded legal reforms. One of the central legal questions the case brought forward was the interpretation of necessary self-defense under Article 37 of the Russian Criminal Code. The defense argued that the sisters had acted out of fear and psychological torment, not malice. Their advocates called for clearer guidelines, recognizing prolonged abuse as a legitimate factor in self-defense cases, especially for women and minors. As of 2025, the Khachaturian sisters, Christina, Angelina, and Maria, remain trapped in a cycle of uncertainty. Though they are no longer in pretrial detention, they are not free. Court-imposed restrictions keep them isolated from one another. Each sister lives separately, forbidden from making contact with her siblings. Internet access is monitored, phone use is restricted, and public statements are discouraged. Their lives remain suspended. Education, employment, relationships, every aspect of adulthood is on hold. They live in apartments under constant legal surveillance. Psychological counseling continues, though state support has been minimal. The sisters struggle with trauma, and their reintegration into society has been slow and painful. Although Mikhail Khachaturian was posthumously found guilty of sexual assault, grievous bodily harm, and distributing pornography, the legal system has yet to fully clear his daughters. Christina and Angelina await a final decision from the Prosecutor General's office. Repeated re-examinations of their mental health and motives continue to delay proceedings. Meanwhile, public support remains strong. Thousands still follow the case online, attend protests, and sign petitions demanding full exoneration. Human rights organizations continue to argue that the sisters acted in a desperate act of self-defense after years of documented abuse. Legal experts have urged lawmakers to use this case as a precedent to reform self-defense laws and domestic violence protections in Russia. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice, in truth, and in standing up for those who've been silenced, then help us keep these stories alive. Like this video, share it, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more real-life cases that deserve to be heard, because every voice matters, especially the ones that were never meant to be heard.